Right here I've got the new Mac Mini M2, and this is the base model. Yes, it only has 8 gigs of RAM and it has 256 gigs of hard drive space. So I'm gonna show you how I set it up for software development and how you can too. But keep in mind, because of the limited space on it, you might want to get something like this in the future once you start running out of space. And this is a Thunderbolt 4 external enclosure that'll help extend the storage and actually make your data transfer speeds a lot faster than the internal SSD. I made a detailed video about this with this machine just recently. Check that out. But for now, let's set it up. So I'm gonna plug it in and we're gonna start from scratch. Sign in with your Apple ID. All right, here we are on the desktop, and this is by default what you get. Now I like to right away start off with cleaning things up. And this is gonna be the first category we're gonna hit. So all this stuff at the bottom, you can right click on it and say hide, blah, 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 but I just can drag this stuff right off and say remove. If you drag it far enough, it'll just show up as remove, and you can drag all these things you don't need right away off of the dock. What I leave in here is these 3 things: the Launchpad, the Finder, and Safari. Even though I'm not a frequent Safari user, I tend to use it to check how web applications sometimes look. Now, most of the time when I'm trying to bring up an app, I use Command Space, and that brings up Spotlight Search. I'll show you another tool shortly, another launcher that's really useful. But for now, I'm gonna bring up Terminal. I'm gonna open that up, and it opens up here, but I'm gonna drag it over to my permanent location for the dock because I like Terminal available right then and there all the time. So even when I close and quit Terminal, I could launch it by using Command Space and then type in Terminal. That's fine since I'm primarily a mouse user, and I'll admit it freely. It's easier for me to just click right there. It's much faster to open it up, and now I'm at the terminal right away. The next thing I'd like to clean up is Finder. Let's have a look at one of these. There's no files anywhere, so let's just create a new folder for the sake of it on the desktop. Now, Finder is not configured the way I like it. It's not enough information, so I like to go to View, Show Status Bar, which shows down here how much space I have available, and then show path bar to allow me to navigate easily down my path in the Finder. I also like to view my Finder as a list, so I changed that. I also like to show the tab bar because sometimes I have multiple tabs open in the Finder, and that's what I can do right there. Now, if you go to your home folder, which is Macintosh HD, users, Alex Z, these are your folders, but you don't see the hidden folders right away. Now, to do that, you can hold down Shift Command period, and that shows all your hidden folders and files. This is going to be important later when we have configuration files like your dot files. Yeah, you can get to all those files using the terminal. Oh, I'm pressing Command plus to increase the size of the terminal, by the way, because I'm getting old. And so you can see it. So I can go to terminal and I can do ls to list the directory. And this is my home directory. It also shows me the folders that are in there. But if I do ls-la, this will show me everything. So -l means show me as a list, and A means show me everything. Now you can see all your folders and files that are hidden too. Another little trick I like to do sometimes is if I have something open in Finder and I want to navigate to that directly, I can just say CD on the terminal and drag the folder over from Finder to Terminal, and it automatically loads the path in there, so I can quickly navigate between Finder and Terminal easily. Useful stuff. Let me delete that folder on the desktop by pressing Command Delete, and now it's in trash. One other thing that really bothers me is I come from a Windows background, actually. I've been using Macs for a number of years, but if I go to Settings and I go to Mouse, I like to switch this scrolling. Instead of natural scrolling, I like the unnatural scrolling, so I switched that off because it makes more sense to me, the direction of scroll. That's really very personal kind of thing, I guess, but for me that works. There's one more thing I like to do with my Finder, and I like to keep all my code and all my projects in one single folder. Out of habit, I have a folder called Code inside my home directory. So my home directory is users, Alex Z, and I'd like to create a new folder here called Code. And I drag this folder up to here to favorites so I can always access it in Finder. However, I got this trick from Andres Vidosa, who also has a YouTube channel. He makes a lot of really cool looking videos. If you create a folder called Developer, it automatically gets a certain icon. And this is the hammer icon that Apple uses to describe developers. If you drag this into your favorites, it still retains that hammer icon. Now you could, of course, customize the icon of any folder. And let's say you wanted a VS Code icon. Here's one. Let's drag that into our code folder. It doesn't need to be in there, but why not? If you right click on that folder, go to Get Info and select the actual folder. You can drag the image right onto that folder, and your folder now will have the VS Code icon. So it's easy to see that when you're in Finder, but that icon does not appear under favorites. However, if you use the developer, which is a special folder name in macOS, you'll get that hammer icon wherever you are. I'm gonna move on to the next thing, which is gonna be utilities. These are just general utilities that we're gonna install that I use. First thing I'm gonna do is open up Safari, search for Chrome, and I like Chrome because it has really good developer tools, so that's why I'm gonna install it. Now, if you go down here on the Chrome installation page, you can get different versions of Chrome if you're interested in that. So there's Canary, which is the most recent version of Chrome. Sometimes I download those to test things out, but generally I just download Chrome the way it is and install that. Now it's in my downloads folder. I can just drag that over to my applications folder and it should be installed. If we go to applications, there's Google Chrome right there. I'm gonna pop that open. One other utility that I like to use and I like to have that available is Activity Monitor. So I'm gonna press Command Space and type in Activity Monitor and I'll open that up. Why do I like to use this? Well, sometimes I like to monitor my CPU load, my GPU load. I do a lot of testing of hardware on this channel, so that comes very handy. And I also want to see Google Chrome to make sure that it's an Apple version of Google Chrome, and it is. By default, you're getting the Apple Silicon version of that, which is good. Now, Activity Monitor ends up over there, but I also like to drag it into my main dock as well as Google Chrome, so I'll put Google Chrome right next to Safari, have it available for me. I usually turn off all notifications from all apps, so I don't allow any notifications if I don't specifically ask them to notify me. All right, I'm gonna close Safari down and eject the Google Chrome installer. The next thing I want to install is Raycast. This is an application I've recently started using, and it's very cool. Go to raycast.com. It is free for personal use, so I'm gonna click on download and I'll show you what it does. We're gonna install it the same way as we did Chrome. We're gonna drag that into applications and it's installed. Now I can use Command Space to type in Raycast and open that up, and you can go through the setup or you can skip setup. I'm gonna skip setup because I just want the defaults for now. Now, what's Raycast? Well, it's an application that helps you interact with the OS. In order to bring it up, instead of pressing Command Space like you would for Spotlight search, you can press Option Space, and that brings up Raycast, which looks a lot like Spotlight search. And you can, in fact, launch everything you can with Spotlight search, but now it's like Spotlight search on steroids. There's a ton of other features here like definitions, calculations, everything is included here. You don't need a separate calculator app. You can translate stuff. You can even add plugins into this thing, and it has confetti, and who doesn't like confetti? When you run confetti, it just does that. I hook that up sometimes to show me the confetti after a build completes, which is fun. The next utility app that I like, and I've been using this one for a long time. Before I even used Macs, I was using Beyond Compare by Scooter Software. It's very old, but it's very good. You get a free trial download right here, and you pick your version that you want. I want the Mac version. You download the zip file, and it just unzips wherever you had your download, but you can drag that into your application folder and run it. Beyond Compare allows you to compare folders and files to each other to see what's changed, what's different, what's been updated. So it's a really useful graphical folder and file comparer. Next, I like to install a program called TG Pro by Tunabelly Software. And actually, I have a link to that down below in the description. This allows me to monitor temperatures, control the fan, temperatures of the GPU, the CPU, the chassis, everything. Now, this is not a free software, but it's only $10. And if you use my affiliate link, I get a little bit from that purchase. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it supports the channel. So I'm going to install that because I use that all the time. And that lives right up there. It shows me the fan speed, the temperature of the machine. By default, you can customize all that. And if you open up the software, you get to see the temperature of the hard drive, the logic board, the power supply, all that useful goodness. That's pretty much the basis of cleanup and getting things ready. Now we're ready to install some software development tools. And we're gonna start off with some basic stuff. The most important piece of software that you're gonna install to manage other software on a Mac is called Homebrew. And in order to install it, you need to run a script. We're gonna go to brew.sh and it tells you right there what to do to install it. So I'm gonna copy that by clicking this little button right here, and I'm gonna go to my terminal and paste that in and run it. Now this is an elevated operation, so we do need to provide the password here in order to run it. Let's go. One note here is that it does try to install command line tools, Xcode command line tools. I like to install Xcode separately. In fact, I've already done that because Xcode installations take so long. You can speed it up, and I have a video showing 3 different options for installing Xcode. I'll link to that video down below. When you install Xcode, it also installs command line tools. Since it's the native Mac OS tool for building code, a lot of other tool chains build upon it. It installs command line tools, and so does Homebrew. Nothing you can do about that. You're gonna have 2 installations of it. One might overwrite the other one. I'm not 100% sure about that. But after Brew installs, you want to go back to Xcode and make sure that Xcode still has a reference to command line tools, the proper version. I'll show you how to do that once this is done. Once Homebrew is finished installing, there is something you gotta do, and don't forget this. You gotta read. It says, next steps, run these 2 commands in your terminal to add Homebrew to your path. Don't forget to do this. It's actually, this is the command that matters the most right here. Let's copy that command and paste it and run it. What did that do? Well, it tells you what it's doing. It's creating a new file called zprofile, which you haven't had before, and it's adding something to it. If I just back out to my home directory right here, lsla, you see this file right here, zprofile, that's new. And you can use the nano editor, which comes built in, to have a look at zprofile. It's a light little editor right on the command line. And that's what it looks like right there. We've added this line to this profile file, which you're going to be using quite a bit when you're going to be adding new stuff here for configuration of other software. All right, to exit Nano, you just press Control X. It tells you right there. Isn't that nice? Control X, you exit Nano. Okay, the next command it tells you to evaluate is this, but really what this is basically a repetition of this, and it's useful if you don't want to close your terminal and reopen it. If you close your terminal and reopen it, it'll run whatever is in zprofile automatically, so it'll register Homebrew with your shell. But we can do that manually ourselves by running this second line right here. Paste, boom. Now you have the brew command. So if we go to brew version, it's telling me that Homebrew is installed, and we are on version 3.6.21. What can we do with brew? Well, we can install software. One thing that's probably everybody uses by now, well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people use is Visual Studio Code. You can go to Visual Studio Code and download this right here and install it that way. You can do that easy. Or if you want to check out your new Homebrew skills, you can say brew install --cask Visual Studio Code. And this will install VSCode for you right from the command line. You don't need to download stuff. You don't need to drag things over. It'll land in your applications folder by default. Homebrew allows you to quickly and easily install software just like we did just now. It's pretty sweet. Okay, it says Visual Studio Code was successfully installed. Let's test this out. I'm gonna try to open it up from command line by saying code dot, which means open up this folder in Visual Studio Code. Yes, here it is. VS Code is open, and I'm gonna say, it's asking me a bunch of questions. Visual Studio Code would like to access files on the desktop. Okay. Documents folder. Okay. Downloads folder. Okay. These are new features with Ventura. It's very secure. Visual Studio Code would like to access your reminders. Fine. Anything else? No? Okay. So then we say, trust the authors of the files of the parent folder users. I trust the authors. So many security questions lately. So here's VS Code, and now we can use this as our editor. So there's our Z profile. We're gonna keep an eye on that file to see how things change and progress. Now, you can also open up VS Code now using Raycast, Option Space, VS Code, there it is. Launch it that way, or you can use good old Spotlight search, Command Space, VS Code. Oh, This one is, I guess you need to type out Visual Studio Code in this one. Yeah, it doesn't understand VS Code, but it is in your Launchpad and it's also in your applications folder right there. Good old installation, just like the regular way. Now for Visual Studio Code, there's a lot of things you can do to configure it. I like to do as little configuration as possible so that things remain light. It's meant to be a light editor, so why bog it down? But there's a couple of things. If you go to extensions, I am actually gonna cheat a little bit because I have my laptop here where I do have the stuff installed, but I'm gonna show you two ways of doing this. One is you can install all the extensions yourself, and I'll show you the ones that I have, or you can synchronize extensions if you have another machine that you're coming from. These are things that I use because I like to use these things. Angular. I use Angular and I'm not ashamed of using it, even though React is pretty popular these days. But Angular Language Services is a thing that I use a lot, so I'm gonna install that. And that allows me to easily interact with Angular projects in VS Code, navigate, refactor, things like that. There's Docker. This has a lot of installs. Look at that, 21.3 million. This one's coming right from Microsoft, so this is a good trusted product right here, extension. We're gonna install that one. It's gonna allow me to manage my containers right inside VS Code. Sometimes it's faster than going into Docker Desktop, unfortunately. One that I've been using a lot, and I don't think I can go without it anymore. Yeah, I'm spoiled now. It's called GitHub Copilot, and I have a video on that on the channel, several videos on that on the channel, and you probably already know what it is. Yeah, it's AI that lets you program faster. I will install this as well. There's also the nightly version of this. Gives you the most up-to-date features, but the regular one is fine. A very handy one is called GitLens. And GitLens, this one right here by GitKraken, allows you to have a lot more visibility into your projects as far as collaboration goes. So we're gonna set up Git, and that's different from GitHub, by the way. GitHub is the website. This is where your repositories are stored. It's just one of the many options out there available. It's the most popular one, but there's also GitLab, there's Bitbucket. They all give you the ability to operate using the Git protocol, which is a way to handle your code changes and conflict resolutions and collaborate with people. I'm going to show you how to set up GitHub and Git in a moment, but for now, and as far as VS Code goes, this GitLens project, a lot of the changes that happen in your Git repositories right inside your editor. Definitely a useful tool. Now, if you're working with Python, you're going to want to check out the Jupyter Notebook extension. Wow, 58 million? So this allows you to work with Jupyter Notebooks right inside VS Code. Really nice, handy tool. Gives you the whole UI with foldable code and things like that. There's also Python extension, 77 million. Wow, this stuff is getting pretty popular. We're going to install this one as well. It's going to give you language features inside VS Code for Python. Then there's Live Server. If you're doing any kind of development, or if you just want to look at HTML pages locally, this is the quickest way to do it right inside VS Code. You install Live Server, and if you're looking at an HTML page, you can just hit a button and it'll start up a really lightweight server and serve that page locally. There's something called Rainbow CSV, which is something I like to use to view CSV files in VS Code. You can also open CSV files in Excel or in Sheets, but VS Code is a really quick and easy way to do it. By default, it just shows everything in white text, so it's hard to see the columns. Rainbow CSV handles this very nicely. It makes each column a different color. If you're using Vue for development of your front-end applications, Vture is a must-have. This handy extension will allow you to navigate your Vue code, and it'll understand your Vue projects better. And also, Prettier is a really nice way to format your code, and this has a ton of configuration options. There's a lot to go into in Prettier, so if you install this extension, you'll automatically get certain pre-configured code formatting tools for all kinds of different file types. You can also configure it further in each project by including a configuration file for Prettier, but this extension allows you to do things right out of the box in VS Code. Now, remember what I said about cheating? Well, if you go down here and you say, turn on settings sync, I can do that, and I can automatically synchronize all the extensions and all my settings for Visual Studio Code without having to reinstall and reconfigure everything. So I'm going to turn on, and I'm going to use GitHub for that because that's where I've already signed up to do my settings synchronization. Open up VS Code. Yes, indeed. Open it up, and now this is going to automatically synchronize everything that I've already used on my previous machine to the new machine. So you can see that a bunch of things popped up here even though I didn't manually install these, like Docker and Git lens and so on. Okay, now I did tell you we were going to look at Xcode and make sure the command line tools is installed properly and it's referenced properly. So we're going to open up Xcode here. It's asking me select the platforms you want to install because this is my first time running it. I'm going to say continue and continue. And now we're going to go to Xcode settings in the menu bar, locations, and make sure that this command line tools right here has something in it. It should point to the current version of Xcode. And here I get a dialog popping up asking me for a password. Okay, fine. So make sure there's something in here for command line tools and you're good to go. We can close Xcode out. Now, I use Xcode quite often, so I'm going to drag that over to my permanent dock location as well. And I'm going to drag Visual Studio Code over to my permanent dock location because I use that all the time. Beyond Compare, I don't use that all the time, so I can just leave that there in my temporary dock. Or if I want to hide it, I can just drag it off and say remove. Now, I do mobile development as well as web development. So there's a couple of tool chains that I need to install next. One is Android Studio and the Android toolchain. The other one is the JavaScript toolchain, which requires Node. Now with Node, you have to be very careful how you install Node. You can install Node using a number of different ways, and a lot of people just go to nodejs.org, download this right here and install it that way. You can do that and it'll work fine, but there's better ways. And also this way might give you permission issues down the line, so you might want to stay away from that. I like to use something called NVM, which is Node Version Manager. You can find it on GitHub right here, and this will give you the installation instructions on how to install it. This allows us to use multiple versions of Node on the same system and switch between them very easily. You see my videos and how I switch between Node. I recommend doing this, and here's the installation script. We're going to run this right now. I do have a separate video detailing more about NVM and how to use it, but we're installing things, so we might as well do it right here. Okay, so I've just ran that script, and look what it says at the end of the script. Appending NVM source string to Z profile. Let's have a quick look at our Z profile now. Look at that, it's changed. We have this line in here to kick up Homebrew when you open up terminal. We also now have this, which points to NVM. Let's see if NVM runs on our terminal. NVM, command not found. But if we restart terminal, NVM, now command is found. So sometimes you need to restart the terminal for the new configuration to be read. And that's usually the easiest way to do it, is just restart the terminal. I'm going to install Node right now, and I'm going to use NVM to do it. NVM install, and the latest version of Node is 18. So I'm going to just say 18. And this is going to grab Node 18 and install Node and NPM just that easily. Now I have Node version 18. I can also say NVM install 16 if I need to do a project that's compatible with only version 16. So now I have two versions of Node installed. If I check the version of Node right now, I have 16. But I can say NVM use 18, and now I'm using Node version 18. So I can switch between them very easily. One piece of advice about this is if you're using global package installations, like let's say you want to install Yarn globally. Yarn is not installed, but if I say npm install Yarn globally, this is how we install global packages. This will install Yarn, and now I have Yarn. I can check the version, good. But I'm using version 18 of Node. If I switch to my Node 16 installation, nvm use 16, now I'm in a different environment for Node, so I don't have Yarn installed anymore. See, Yarn not found. You need to install any global packages for each version of Node, and that sometimes is confusing to people. It was confusing to me when I started with this, so keep that in mind. All right, we've got Node installed, so now you can do web development. You have the entire Node ecosystem available at your fingertips. Node is also a prerequisite for a lot of the cross-platform tools like NativeScript, React Native, Ionic. They all work with the native toolchain, which is Xcode and Android, as well as Node. Speaking of Android, we need to install that. Let's go to Android Studio. I'm going to search for that. And you can go to Android Studio and download and install it here, which is usually what I do. Or you can use Homebrew to install Android Studio, just like that. I'm going to use Homebrew since we already have that installed. I'm going to paste that in here. Brew install --cask Android Studio. Let's go. Now that Android Studio is installed, that was very quick, by the way. We're going to launch it. You can just launch it from applications. Hit open. Do not import settings, that's fine. Don't send. Okay. I also like to drag this one into my permanent dock, by the way. Here we are at the Android Studio welcome screen, and you can hit next to set up Android Studio. What type of setup do you want to use? You can configure this how you like. I'm just going to take the defaults right now and keep hitting next until we're done. This is a licensing agreement, but it also allows you to install the Android SDK. Android SDKs are something you'd need to develop mobile apps. You need Android SDKs. So I'm going to accept that, and it's automatically going to download the SDK licenses. We're going to go back and configure a little bit more for Android SDKs because a lot of the tooling has not caught up to the latest version, which is, as of right now, version 33. But I'll show you how to do this so you can keep up with the versions that you need at the time that you're watching this video, and also have it be backwards compatible. Here we are on the Android screen. This is the electric eel version. And if you go to more actions here, if you don't have any projects in there yet, you'll have more actions. You can also go to Android Studio here and go to settings, and you can reach the tools and build and execution deployment stuff from there as well. But we're going to go to more actions and SDK manager. See, you're still in the same settings dialog as they call it from up here. Android SDK is under system settings. What I want to do is go to the SDK platforms tab, and I want to install Android 12, 11. Let's go with those two for now. Before I hit apply, you can hit apply and install those, but we also want to go to SDK tools. Here, make sure that Android emulator is being installed. Android SDK command line tools. Let's put a check mark there. Let's make a check mark for Android SDK build tools. And for now, that should be good enough. You could also install Google Play services, but for now, I'm just going to skip that. Hit OK. This will ask you to confirm, and you're going to need to accept the agreements. Hit next, and this will download and install everything. The latest version of Android Studio installs a Java JDK for you, which is the Java development kit. And you can check that by going to the terminal and say Java version, and there it is. It installs OpenJDK. But you can actually change the version of Java that you want to use and register with Android Studio. I actually have a video on that, and I will link to that video down below. That video also demonstrates the differences that you might see with different versions of Java performance-wise. For most cases, this should be enough, and that's all you really need. So that comes bundled with Android Studio. There is something else you might need to do is if you're using cross-platform development tools for mobile apps, for example, NativeScript, they require that you also export the Android home environmental variable to point to the Android SDK. So first, we're going to check to make sure the Android SDK is, in fact, where this is pointing to. You can check where the SDK is by going to Android Studio and then going back to the SDK manager. And under Android SDK, you'll see the Android SDK location right here. If yours is different than the one in the documentation of whatever cross-platform tool you're installing, then this is what you're going to use, the one that's in Android Studio SDK location. In our case, it does match. So home should be something that's already defined, and you can check that by going to echo and then print out home, and it is. So we can use this very same path right here. In fact, both of these paths, and we can add that to our Z profile file. Right here, I'm gonna paste that in. I'm gonna export those two things. Now, this should not be defined yet on the terminal. I'm gonna echo Android home, and let's just check to make sure everything is working. We need a $sign in front of that because it's an environmental variable. Nothing's there. I'm gonna save the Z profile file, and then I'm gonna restart terminal. And now, if I say echo $Android home. Now we have it pointing to the Android SDK location, so we're good to go. You can see our Z profile file is getting a little more stuff in it, and it's gonna have a lot more depending on what you install. Speaking of which, if you're working with Python, which I sometimes do, you don't have to install Python. You can just start using it. Mac OS already comes with Python, and you can check this by saying Python version 3.9. Not bad. It's not the latest. We've got 3.10 after that, and 3.11, and 3.12 is coming soon. But 3.9 is a pretty recent version, and it's a good one. So you can start typing Python code right away and creating Python projects, or you can create containerized environments. So you can switch versions of Pythons within those environments, and you do that using Conda or Anaconda. If you search for Anaconda or go to anaconda.com, you can see it right here. You can download it and install it. You can also install it using Homebrew. There's the command for it. Brew install cask Anaconda, and this will get you a way you can manage your Conda environments. I have a video on this again. I'll link to it down below. It's a separate video going into more detail about this. Now, Anaconda is a very large large package and it's got a lot of stuff in it. It's also quite big. If you don't need all the features that Anaconda provides, you can install a smaller version of Conda. It doesn't have all the packages, but it's enough to get you the environments, and that's called mini Conda. Brew install -- cask mini Conda. I'm gonna do that one. Let's go back to the terminal, install mini Conda, and I'll show you how to use it. Conda was installed. Now you can just say Conda -- version, and there it is. I'm gonna restart my terminal again and make sure that Conda is still there, and it is. Why wouldn't it be? You can create a separate Conda environment by saying Conda create -- name, and you name your environment. Let's say I want a Python 10 environment. So I'm gonna say py 3.10. I should say 3.10, not 10. So now it's gonna create a new environment. It's going to ask me if that's okay. It created a brand new environment called py 3.10. If I want to see all the environments that are installed, I say conda env list. So now I have two environments, the default one, which is called base, and py 3.10. And this tells you how to activate the environment. You just say conda activate. I'm going to copy that and paste it right here. Oh, it says your shell has not been properly configured to use conda activate. Well, let's see what it does. We can follow the instructions right here. It says conda init, and I'm using zsh, so I'm gonna pass that in as the parameter. Okay. So if you read this, you'll see that there's a couple of things that happened. One is that it modified a new file, zshrc. We haven't seen this file before. We're going to take a look at it. But for now, it says for changes to take effect, close and reopen your current shell. So I'm going to close it, reopen it, and now you see something different. Now, in front of my name, you'll see base in parentheses. This is the default Conda environment. So now Conda is activated immediately when you start up terminal. You can deactivate it by saying conda deactivate, and this will leave it and just give you the default the way it was before. But if we want to activate that new environment that we created called py 3.10, right? Let's check. Conda env list. Yeah, py 3.10. So conda activate py 3.10. And now we're inside our Python 3.10 environment. But we don't have Python installed in this environment. Remember what we did with Node and how we didn't have yarn installed in one of our environments there? If we say Python version, we still have the default one, but we can say conda install Python and then equals 3.10 and say yes here. And this will install Python 3.10 and configure it inside of our conda environment that's called py 3.10. So now if I say Python -- version, oops, Python 3.10. If I say conda deactivate, I'm going to leave the py 3.10 environment. Now if I run Python version, we're on 3.9. So now you can have multiple versions of Python installed in different environments of Conda. And you even have the default one if you want. Now, what about that file that it edited? Well, it didn't put anything in this zprofile file, but it created a new one called zshrc, which is similar. When you start up terminal, it's going to look in zshrc and also zprofile, and it's going to run whatever is in there to activate or configure the software that you need. So this is the new zshrc file, and as you can see, it's doing an initialization of Conda, basically letting the terminal know where to find Conda, how to activate its environments, and so on. And it also exports its own bin. So these are your custom configuration files. Keep them safe, back them up if you need to. Now, sometimes I use Docker to run some containers when I'm doing development work. You can go to docker.com, read the instructions, install the software right here, Docker Desktop. By the way, if you click this button, it'll give you the Intel chip variety. And if you're on an Apple Silicon machine, you want to go to this one right here. So you want to download the installer for Apple chip. You can do this, and it's fine to do it that way. Or you can use Homebrew. Brew install -- cask. Docker will give you the exact same thing. But since I've already downloaded this one, I'll install Docker the old-fashioned way, which is using the DMG. So I'm going to drag this to the applications folder, and once it's done, this will be in applications, and there it is, Docker. So you can double click to run it. You can accept the terms. You're going to need to give it elevated permissions because it needs to run through the virtualization engine and connect to some lower level APIs. This is going to do two things. One is there's Docker Desktop. This is Docker Desktop. It'll show you everything that's running. your containers, images, volumes, and so on. It also allows you to do customizations and configurations. If you go up here to settings, you'll be able to allocate different resources, different amounts of resources to Docker, how many CPUs, how much memory, and so on. But you also now have Docker available on your command line, Docker, and there it is. Now you can control Docker through the command line as well. If you're interested to see more about Docker, I have a bunch of videos on my channel. You can check those out. They include performance testing on the new MacBooks, as well as actual instructions on how to utilize Docker. Now, I often need to do HTTP debugging when I'm doing web application development or mobile application development. So I use this tool called Postman. You go to postman.com/downloads, make sure you grab the Apple chip version, and it's just a zip file. You can unzip it and it's going to give you the application, which you can just drag into the applications folder. And there it is, Postman. Run the program. It's absolutely free. And yeah, you can set up collections, API endpoints, environments, mock servers. You can change your authorization headers and body and do put requests and post requests and get requests. For example, here's a get request for google.com. I'm going to send that off and it's going to come back with the HTML that's returned from that endpoint, which is just the Google homepage. Very useful tool. I use it all the time for when I'm building APIs or doing any kind of work that has to do with HTTP stuff, which is pretty much everything. A lot of the times we're going to keep our code on GitHub. Now you can easily clone public repositories, but what about private repositories and what about updating repositories? You're going to need to do all these things. So two-way communication is important here. One way you can easily do this is by using GitHub Desktop. This is not the way I prefer to do it, but that's just because I'm old school and I do things from Visual Studio Code and from the terminal. That's not really old school. But GitHub Desktop is another way you can manage your GitHub repositories directly, and it's really easy and it's visual. All you do is download the installer for Apple Silicon, unpack GitHub Desktop zip file, and drop that into your applications folder as you would some of the other installations that we've done. Now we just start this app up from the applications folder, and it's going to ask you to sign in via GitHub. If you're already signed in on the web, you're good to go. Configure Git. Sure, you can go through all this and it's going to be super easy. But what if you're not using GitHub, or what if you're using multiple Git providers and multiple repository providers? GitHub is just one of them. Well, you might need to set up something called SSH keys so that you can easily clone and publish your repositories without having to log in and provide credentials every time you do it. In GitHub, you do this by going to settings and then going to SSH and GPG keys. In order to get that key, you have to generate it on your machine first. Now, the best thing to do if you want to remember how to do this is use GitHub's own documentation. Here's how to generate a new SSH key and add it to your agent. On a Mac, we're going to generate a new key by using this command right here. Open up terminal, and I don't have my Windows management yet enabled. I'll show you how to do that momentarily, but for now, we're going to use this right here. I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and make sure you're using the correct email address and not the sample one. It's going to be alex@nuvs.com for me. This right here, -t, and this ed25519, that's an algorithm that it's going to be using to generate the key. Enter the file name, and I'm going to accept the default. The file name is going to be this right here. It's going to create a new directory for storing SSH keys, and now you need to enter the password that you're going to use for that twice. There we go. The key has been generated. So now if we check LSLA, you'll see a new directory called SSH, and if we list the files that are inside that directory, you'll see those two files right there. The next step is to add the SSH key to the SSH agent that's running. We do that using this right here. Paste that command in there and run it. I'm going to skip the part that says we're going to use the SSH key in the keychain, and I'm going to skip to the part that says adding your new SSH key to your GitHub account. You can install the CLI, but I'm not going to do that here. I prefer to use the command line tools for using Git. All right, now the prerequisites is that check your SSH keys exist, and they do. Right over here, and then add a new key to the account. We run pb copy and then this file name. So I'm going to copy this whole thing, paste it in here, and because I accepted all the defaults, those are the exact file name matches. If you named your file something else, you would have something else here. But this file name should match this file name. Enter. It copied the contents of that file to my clipboard. So now I can go back to my GitHub user interface, go to settings, go to SSH keys, add a new key, give it a name. This is going to be my Mac Mini. I'm going to paste the key in here and then click add SSH key. There we go. Now, if I go to my repositories and I want to clone something, let's say this one, you can get the code and you can clone through HTTPS or you can clone through SSH protocol, which I'm going to use now. So I'm going to go to my code folder and then git clone, paste that SSH entry and click enter. Are you sure you want to continue? Let's type in yes, enter your passcode, and there we go. Now I've cloned that repository, which is this right here. So I can go in there and open that up in VS Code and we're off to the races. Now if I make a change here, let's say I go in package.json and let's say I want to update TypeScript to the latest version. I can go in here and update it, and now I'm gonna need to make that commit. So in VS Code, I would normally do that here by typing a commit message, updated TypeScript, click add and commit, but VS Code is not yet configured, so you're gonna get a message like this. But you can do that through command line. So if you go back to terminal and say git status, you'll see that we do have a modified file here, and you can do git commit with a message, updated TypeScript, enter. And from the command line, you'll see that your name and email address were configured automatically based on your username and hostname. But if you want to change that, you can use this command right here, git config global user.name, type in a new name, and git config global user.email and type in a new email address. So now if I go back to VS Code, it already knows that that has been committed in the background. Now all I'll have to do on the command line, git push, it'll ask me for my passphrase. By the way, it won't ask you for your passphrase if you configure it with keychain. You can follow the instructions on how to do that. Now, if I go to my repository, you'll see that I have that push updated TypeScript 1 minute ago. With VS Code, you'll still be able to work with this repository. And for example, if I go to source control and I go to fetch, up here is going to ask me for my SSH password, just like the command line does. And there we go, we fetched it. And if you don't want to keep seeing that message, you can just store the GitHub credentials in your keychain. And that's the step 3 that I've skipped over. You can check out the GitHub documentation for that step. But for the most part, you are all set to be able to use GitHub. Now there's one more thing I want to configure here, and that's, well, it's actually multiple things. I want to install Parallels, which is going to let me install Windows and use Windows on a Mac, but Parallels also comes with a whole suite of tools that I can use to manage my Mac, and these are tools I use all the time. By the way, this is not a free tool. Parallels is paid, but they have a trial that you can try out. And I have a link down below, and often they have sales. So I'll make sure to keep that updated. To check in the description down below. So I'm going to go to Parallels and I'm going to click on free trial, Parallel Desktop for Mac. And that's the installer right there. I'm going to run that. Click OK here. This is going to download and install Parallels. And if you've watched my channel for even a little bit, you know that I love this program and I've been using virtualization since the 2000s. First, there was VMware Workstation, which I was a big fan of at the time, but unfortunately, VMware fell a little bit behind when Apple Silicon came out, but now Parallels is the way to go, and that's my recommended approach to virtualization on an Apple Silicon machine. These things change all the time though, so for now, that's the way it is, and it has been for the last couple of years. Here we go. Parallels is installed. We're gonna go next, gonna give it some permissions, and when it starts up, it gives you a really easy way to install Windows. It's part of the wizard, in fact. You don't even need to do anything else. Of course, you can install Linux, you can install another version of Mac OS. I'm gonna say install Windows. It's gonna download and install a virtual Windows. But while it's doing that, I wanted to show you something else. If you purchase Parallels Professional, you get Toolbox for free, but you can also try Toolbox as a separate product. So right here, I'm gonna select Parallels Toolbox and let's go to Mac, and I'm gonna install this one as well. Now, Parallels Toolbox allows me to do all kinds of things like capture an area of the screen, record my screen, download videos, free up memory. If we take a look at the full library of things that they offer, it's pretty insane because I use this all the time. Clean your drive. You can also measure CPU temperature with this program too, but I use TG Pro because it has a little bit more control over that. Convert video formats, download audio, encrypt files. You can go into presentation mode, which I use all the time when I'm recording videos, so that it cleans up your desktop instantly. Recording different parts of the screen, showing desktop. And one really important thing here is Window Manager. This will allow me to snap windows from side to side, from top to bottom. And basically it's a Windows Manager that comes bundled with this entire suite of different tools. Really handy. And by the time I finished talking, Windows was installed and it's starting up already. And now you can do all the Windows things that you do. That's it for me today. Thanks a lot for watching. If you do have any questions or specific things or any other tutorial parts that I missed, let me know in the comments down below what else you want to see. Otherwise, it's been fun. It's been a long one, but thanks for sticking through it, and I will see you in the next one.